as we really, wrap our brain around and tackle a very salient issue as we really look to continue our work in this era of COVID-19, to still really put front and center the support for our young people in their social and emotional learning, which is the process of supporting their social and emotional development. And so, we really want to take a time here to really ground ourselves in the fact that there has been a shift and there's a lot going on. And we are exploring and really building on work that research has been synthesizing and pushing out and building capacity when we were in front of each other. And this idea that when we are together, how we create guidance so that we can engage our young people and the adults who are implementing programs or supporting young people across their development, to make sure that we're engaging our young people in exploring their emotions, in building positive relationships with their peers and adults, and really coining more and more the phrase of using or engaging developmental relationships, and we'll explore that. And how we, in general, get together both at the adult level to support each other, to make sure that we are supporting young people in the most appropriate and responsive way related to our work. And really trying to pay attention to the learning conditions that impact instruction. Now, this was something that we were wrapping our brains around together collaboratively through behavioral health teams, through different routines that were happening at the school to affect climate, to impact the lives of our young people and make the shift that we knew needed to happen at the cultural level of our school building or the learning environment. But now we know that the learning environment has shifted. That's why we're all here today. So the idea here is we wanted to kind of bring front and center this idea that we don't want to lose the elements that we know we were focusing so intently on when we were together in the classroom or in the school building, to make sure that we leverage the psychology of the situation here. To make sure that once we get over some of the shifts and some of the sediment settles, that we get back to trying to create routines that can support our young people to reduce some stress. And again, this is going to be a different look depending on where we are and the young people we are supporting. But the idea here is at some point we want to get back to some of the normalcy, as we kind of talk about, that we know used to happen, that will support positive learning conditions. And now we know that those learning conditions or the learning setting has changed. So we have to even be more explicit than we were before about the sequence and the flow of the content. We have to be extremely intentional about the work that we're trying to think through as we push our young people to come out and gather through and work through this. And just similar to when we used to be in the classroom, we have to really put together this idea of being developmentally appropriate in our approach of this work, because we know we do not want to oversaturate our learners at this moment, as they are also adjusting and their psychology is looking to process these different concepts, including academic, including all the different shifts to not being able to go to school and what is happening in the exterior world. So we have to really push ourselves to check the amount of dosage that we're proposing in our instruction, and also the amount of processing and time that we need. And this can even go back to some of those Castle 3 signature practices about how we make sure that we build routines, rituals, that get that engaging content and differentiate it through groups, and get ourselves into a place of reflection at the end to make sure that this learning is seeping in. And then what are we engaging them in during this instruction is also really important. It's also to contextualize and engage educators to find out what do they need at this time on top of the academic, even technological needs that might be arising at the moment, but really trying to assess what are the other additional tools, resources, and supports that they'll need, specifically as we engage young people in deeper understanding of what's going on with this current COVID-19 situation, specific to the health implications, but also a lot, again, to the social implications of this. You know, we know that our young people have hit pause on their work, hit pause on their social lives, hit pause on proms and all of the other teams that they used to participate that supported this development. So one of the resources that we really wanted to push out today that is really coming out is to really how do we get into and continue to leverage connections and relationships in this virtual world. And the Search Institute is still building off of their developmental relationship framework in this time of COVID, and really leveraging the fact that we can take this time in the virtual environment to continue to get into relationships and connections with our young people, with our colleagues that push us to express care, to challenge growth, to provide support, whatever that support might look like, to get into a position of sharing power and collaborating so that we can expand the possibilities and keep pushing ourselves, again, to keep pushing the churn of the psychological piece here that we really need to do. And so you'll have a link here, and it is in your resource pack, this idea of being able to find this checklist that I think is very practical for any educator. And they are also hosting a webinar in the next few days. So what are some resources that we want to push out around the ecology of parents and families? Again, it's always been a critical part of learning and education and outcomes to make sure that we can get into the space of the family or caregiver ecology. And we know that our young people were experiencing those type of supports in so many different ways when they were coming to school. And so in this current virtual environment, we want to give you guys some very practical resources that will help meet the immediate needs. The most, again, we need to make sure, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, to make sure that we really are addressing what our families and what our young people need even before we're engaging them in any type of instruction, and making sure that they feel safe and cared for. So you have all those resources also in your packet. Now, for us educators, we want to really broaden now, and we were always trying to broaden educator, because we know that learning and the science of learning and development was pushing us to understand that it takes a village to affect this type of social and emotional learning, the development, the positive outcomes that we're pushing. And the idea here is really, you still want to make sure that all educators have an opportunity to think through these constructs. And that's across all roles, because we know that teachers at the moment are engaged. They're engaging in their shift towards e-learning, remote learning, and different ways of supporting the learner. But we also know that in this time we were together, we were focusing on all of the ecology of those who are affecting young people. And this is a critical time to really engage all those resources and really make sure that we think about well-rounded educational experiences. We get those really great insights from our colleagues in the field, and then still really put some intentional planning work into how we establish those learning conditions and provide those ongoing social and emotional support. Now, we also have to talk about the fact that we are all, as educators within our practice, making a big shift. So this idea of getting into personalized learning, both for educators or the adult learner in this scenario, is really making sure that we also put into play some of the existing research that we've always had, that we were leveraging when we were together and in person, to making sure that we can support each other in our well-being and the processing of our own adult SEL, or our own emotional intelligence about how we are adjusting, coping with these shifts and the different stresses that have been put on us, both internally to our learning, to our job, but also obviously to the external environment. So a couple of them that we want to highlight that are really taking off and are really great in this virtual space are identifying reflective learning partners, or peer-to-peer mentoring in a way, getting together with colleagues and really talking through the different shifts and the different constructs that are happening, specifically technological, specifically around curriculum and project design, and then really getting into co-developing learning plans and mimicking some of the structures that we did when we were together in the school building, and we were meeting for grade level meetings, and we were getting together for behavioral health group constructs, and thinking through making sure that we were culturally responsive. This is the time to really put those things into play and plan and try to still mimic some of that normalcy. And then obviously getting into some of these communities of practices, really thinking through the existing systems of multi-tier systems of support that were existing, those community advisory boards that at the moment might be wanting to help and don't know how to help. So we want to really make sure that we activate all of our assets that we have available to us.
Thank you so much for that, Fausto. And just to reinforce, all of the links from Fausto's presentation just now, you can find in the link roundup. And if I can ask our educators to come back on screen, actually Kate and Nancy, I'd like to find out from you all. And actually, Kate, can we start with you? Can you tell us what you've done in terms of supporting student social and emotional learning? And in particular, what were some challenges? How did you address them? And what kind of strategies did you find most useful?
Sure. So I'll move pretty quickly through the challenges because I think most of us are facing the same ones. We want to get kind of right into strategies. The main challenges for my classroom are probably pretty similar to most people here right now. We have students who are low income, who are new to the country, some who are parents themselves. Many are working part-time or full-time, and some have lost jobs or had a family member lose a job in the recent weeks. Some students are living in chaotic situations, maybe being without reliable internet or a quiet place to study. They're typically relying on school for food, social services, emotional support, and peer-to-peer relationships. That feeds into the challenges that we face as educators. The big concept here being for me, what does it look like to teach and assess a class equitably during a pandemic? What does a fair class look like when some students might be able to function reasonably well, but another student is worried about food, bills, family members, and that brain space to study and focus has now been brought down to a zero. So how do we shift the way we teach and assess in a way that continues to hold students to high standards, to make measurable skills gains, to challenge and push them while remaining compassionate to those issues above? So those are some of the challenges that I'm dealing with and that I think most of us are. So I'll get right into some strategies. I'm addressing this in a few different ways, and I'm happy to share more. One big thing is maintaining a sense of community. I want to still be able to work with them as a group, offering my own support and giving them a way to continue making that peer-to-peer connection. I'm checking in with them as a group on our classroom app at their regular class time, which they don't have to come to at that time if they can't. But I think knowing what part of the day is specifically blocked off to get support from me and talk to their friends can give some structure to this otherwise really chaotic time. And I'm making sure that it's more than just a text box. I'm trying to make sure they hear my voice, they see my face during this time. That goes a long way towards building and maintaining those strong relationships. One way I've specifically done this is creating instruction videos for students to watch, and I've done phone or video calls in place of what's normally a one-on-one conference with students. It's not just me though, I'm trying to give them as many opportunities to safely interact with each other's faces and voices. One example is to have students send a photo of their classroom or share something that made them smile during the weekend. When I've done this, it gives students a chance to see a funny photo or see a student's baby or parent in the background and continue to feel connected to their classmates as friends and as peers. They can tease each other, they send flower emojis, they answer questions for each other, and they kind of maintain that sense of community, which helps a lot with the social isolation piece. Just being a little more concrete really quick, we also have a classroom app that I've kind of referenced, and we had some luck on our side. We implemented that early, which gave us a little bit of an edge. We're using the classroom app Ding Talk, which gives students a singular, straightforward, and relatively intuitive platform to continue large parts of our class. Students have to use a specific code to join their online classroom, which gives the admin, that's me, full control over who's accepted or rejected from the online classroom. My students have one large group chat where I can make general announcements, and within that, they're each divided into their classroom that they would be in the building. They can send emails and write papers. They can message me or another classmate in a private chat and turn in digital assignments. There's an attendance feature which we can set to specific clock in and clock out times, which is helpful for accountability if you're trying to track when you're providing services and for how long. It's also similar to other messaging platforms students might use in their personal lives, like Facebook Messenger, in that it allows students to tag each other or for me to tag them in a question or response, and to use emojis, which is really helpful for some of our young students or our ESL learners to be a little more nuanced with what they're trying to express when they don't have the word or the sentiment. And I'll just finish with one example from today. I used this app for my class this morning. Before we started here, I sent out a link to a radio program about COVID and nursing homes. I teach a nursing assistant class, so that was relevant. I sent the link out in our app, and I asked them to listen to the program at any point today and send back a few thoughts or questions they had. I'm able to respond in real time. I can see who's opened the link, and students can talk to each other about their thoughts or have questions, or again, just have that peer-to-peer connection.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm seeing questions come in the chat box. Kate is a high school teacher. So clarifying for those of you who are asking, and it is Ding Talk, is that correct, Kate?
Yes, Ding Talk,
okay.
As in dog.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, Kate. Now I'd like to get Nancy's perspective from the elementary education age on same questions. How are you supporting SEL? What are strategies that work for you?
I'm in. So as you said, I am a kindergarten through 5th grade math instructional coach. And so our primary goal is just to make sure that we help the kids transition to a new normal. And with that, we are partnering with our parents because they—
Sorry, Nancy, I'm hearing that people can't hear you. So if you could speak just a touch louder. So sorry.
Okay. We are partnering with our parents, and this is something that we want to make sure that we keep in close contact with our parents. So we have a variety of methods. We use our Google Apps for Education. We have an online service that allows us to text and to phone parents and to do this in multiple languages. We also are in close connection with close connection with the local news stations to make sure information goes out regarding like meals and any kind of support. Another item for elementary is that we have people that do not have connectivity. And so we have schools within our district where you can go to just the parking lot if you need to. If you have a device that is from the school, you can connect via the internet that way. Or we also have Wi-Fi hotspots. Just some of the ways that we are helping to support the families. For the classroom, we are doing asynchronous learning for the most part, but we do want to make sure that we are making those weekly connections, and that could be something as simple as sending out a form and saying, hey, check and tell me how you're doing. It could also be a weekly meeting that we're having online. So those are just a few of the items that we do.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's a very appreciative voice on how you're handling all of those strategies. So now I just want to mention, we are trying to deal with the mic issues and recognizing that that's happening, but we hope you all found that instructive. And if you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat box. We'll make sure that they end up in the right place. And now I'd like to turn it over to Melissa Rasberry.
Hi, everyone. We know that this is a really difficult time for districts as you're facing some immense challenges and scrambling to meet the needs of students and teachers in the face of this pandemic. Educators have to be faced with transitioning from typical classrooms into remote learning basically on a dime. And while we know those conditions are not ideal, we wanted to provide a framework upon which you could consider the changes necessary to make this transition. Next slide, please. In previous years, AIR worked with the U.S. Department of Education and its Office of Educational Technology to develop a toolkit for future-ready leadership, or in other words, how to lead systems change and integrating technology to broaden students' learning. We began with a literature scan about best practices for EdTech and landed on these 4 focus areas as guiding principles for leaders as they shift into a tech-focused environment. Though this toolkit was developed prior to the COVID-19 crisis, the framework can easily be tailored to the current reality many districts are facing. The first part that I wanted to speak to you about is a collaborative leadership. The crisis necessitates now more than ever a commitment to strong collaborative leadership. As you figure out your next steps, consider your vision for remote learning and the immediate goals through the rest of the school year, for example, as well as how they connect to your pre-existing long-term goals for your district. Seek out voices from a variety of contexts, tapping into your parent and community stakeholders who are already on like your school councils or other advisory boards, to hear from them directly about the challenges they are facing, and perhaps even from the community, the resources they have available and could share with your district. The last two bullets are really key. We're hearing this from a lot of folks in the field, that collaboration to streamline messaging to students and parents. Right now, it can be pretty overwhelming. Many of you on this may have experienced this yourself as parents, to be receiving messages from multiple sources and trying to keep up with all that students are being asked to do. And so considering ways to consolidate those, making things a bit easier to follow. One example that I wanted to highlight was out of Seattle Public Schools. They've established a web page where they house all of their district messaging and resources. They link back to previous weeks. For example, they give updates on a weekly basis, and they link back to those in case someone might have missed it. And while they're sent out via email, there's also that landing place where people can go back to that information as they find it helpful. So you could replicate that for your districts and even for individual schools. And lastly, I wanted just to point out to just keep in mind that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Right now, we are all trying to adjust to this new normal, all of us. And it can be difficult to parent, to homeschool, and to try to work remotely. And so just kind of keeping that in mind when you're looking at it and considering things holistically. Now, on this next focus area around personalized learning for students, when we think of this, it looks a bit different than it would if we were considering it in an in-person setting. Your goal should not be to replicate the school environment. Let me say that again. Your goal should not be to try to replicate the school environment. That is, do not think in terms of like 6 to 8 hour days of instruction at home. That's simply not possible right now. Perhaps not even possible in ideal conditions. But when you think about personalized learning, you must take into consideration, of course, that all students may not have access to devices. So plan both plugged and unplugged activities that don't require connectivity. UNC TV and the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, for example, have partnered to share educational resources that align PBS programming with North Carolina state standards. So while this may still be considered plugged, it's open to all kids who have access to public television, which is, you know, a much broader group of kids than perhaps those who have internet access. If you are able to get online with students, consider, as Nancy talked about, scheduling virtual class meetings so you can see your students and help to build that community and give them a sense of normalcy with seeing their classmates and friends. And then whatever you plan, do keep in mind that students who have special needs will need similar accommodations at home, to try to kind of keep that in perspective. The next issue around robust infrastructure looks much, much different when we consider the issues related to remote learning. Equitable access to next generation bandwidth and solid secure wireless networks may be possible in schools, but it becomes a broader challenge when we're talking about kids at home. So we ask, when you're surveying your students about their access, be sure to keep their responses anonymous so they don't feel the sense of self-consciousness about what they have compared to their peers. Also think outside of the box to consider ways to get more kids connected. I think, again, this was an idea that Nancy considered was, you know, bringing the internet to them. The exemplar that I'm sharing here is in South Carolina. One district sent out buses loaded with Wi-Fi routers so that kids in low-income communities could get online. Others are loaning out devices if they are available, and just being able to give access to kids in that way. And then finally, when you're designing your learning plans, consider that some kids may have access to devices and may be able to get connected, but they have to share that access with siblings and perhaps their parents who are working from home. So be sure to kind of limit what's required in terms of synchronous online learning activities so that, you know, kids can kind of get it in when it's available and they can share across. And then finally, personalized learning for teachers. It is key during this time to think about our teachers. We know that this has been a major learning curve for everyone, but teachers included. Now is the time to connect with colleagues for support and collaborative development of learning plans. Don't try to do this in isolation. Work with your grade level peers, your subject area colleagues. come together and develop these ideas for home. And then build out your virtual learning networks too. A lot of teachers use Twitter to personalize their learning. There are tons of ed chats available for subject areas across the grade span. If you are interested in 5th grade English language arts, there's probably a chat for you. Similar if you're working with middle school guidance. So really kind of tapping into and using social media as not just a way to be connected personally, but also professionally. Districts, of course, can also play a role in providing online professional development so that teachers are learning on the same tools that students are using. And educators, this truly is the time to stay connected and to lean into learning online as professionals. So we wish you the best of luck and hope that you will find these resources and tips and tools beneficial for the students that you're working with as well.
Thanks for that, Melissa. For those of you who joined the previous webinar, we focused on high-level e-learning strategies that are aligned with research on good teaching and learning, so the instructional side of this. Today we're going to build on that with some information that can help you start to think about policy and practice changes for the longer term, including where to turn for information you can trust as you continue to adapt and look for some sense of assurance. Like last time, I'll note that this list is not representative of everything available to everyone, and we continue to encourage you all to be conscientious about how you approach the selection process for e-learning. Also, the links I'm sharing will be available in the roundup we're providing. So first, we want to look at a few sources for state and district leaders. The Comprehensive Center Network consists of 19 regional comprehensive centers and 1 national comprehensive center that provide resources and technical assistance services to all states and territories. In response to COVID-19, they've put together a list of what they're calling continuity resources, which are resources for a broad variety of impacted audiences in the system to help learning continue throughout the disruption of regular school operations. Similarly, the U.S. Department of Education is continuously updating their resource page for all things responding to COVID-19. This page includes content for people working in all levels of the education system, and leaders can look there for key guidance around federal programs as that guidance emerges. I want to point out EdWeek, the publication, is also providing thorough coverage of the situation. This is one example. It's their map of all the school closures across the country and up-to-date details on how different states are responding. So as teachers and caregivers continue to support students throughout the school closures and e-learning, you're dealing with the fact that in some states and districts, the situation is really open-ended right now. And frankly, it can be difficult to keep planning when you're not sure how long you need to plan for. In this situation, it's important to be able to trust sources of information, whether we're talking about resources to put into instruction, standards